What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rage, and I'm back with some of the first Descendant gameplay to be able to bring to you. Now, today I'm going to be discussing my brand new favourite Descendant that exists in the game, and this is going to be Kyle. He is an absolute juggernaut. He is basically needed on every single team, because not only can he sustain so much damage, he is the aggro, he is the tank character that exists in this game, but he also has some insane damage output, ranging anywhere between a 250,000 all the way up to 1 million damage, I believe I've heard in the community, with his ultimate, and it's crazy as to how effective this can actually be, all the way into void intercepts, into just standard defense, everything like that. Every single bit of content Kyle can pretty much cover. So in this video we're going to be discussing everything to do with his kit, the best ways to be able to start gearing him up so you can do all that tanking, all that damage as well, and then basically my final thoughts on the class as well. If you do enjoy this type of video and you want to see more from us when it comes to the first Descendant, we are recognised creator partners for the first Descendant for the game, and we are looking forward to when this game finally drops. But if you want to see more like this from ourselves, make sure to drop that like and subscribe. It really does help the channel out, and so you can find your way back for some more of the first Descendant content. But with all that said and done, what are we waiting for? Let's dive right into it. Alright then, so why don't we just start with Kyle's kit, because this is all going to depend on what we actually bring in with us. This is going to depend on the stats that we're going to be looking into and everything like that, and it just kind of explains the main kind of playstyle and the main kind of resource that Kyle brings to the table. So if we head ourselves over to the Descendant screen, we can have a quick look through everything. So we do have 4 skills that we can use and 1 passive, and the passive is going to tie everything together. So let's have a look at that one first, because that's going to explain the resources for us. And this is going to be Experienced Technician. How this one works is that it increases your max magnetic force proportional to your max energy shield. When Kyle's energy shield is depleted, you gain Magnetic Care. Magnetic Care recovers energy shield and magnetic force at fixed intervals. This gains a cooldown, and when you're out of combat, this is consumed at fixed intervals. Now how this one works is that on as standard it's going to be 5 minutes, but you can get this reduced down if you do have cooldown mods. So I've currently got mine down to 207 seconds, but essentially you've got your health, you've got your shield and you've got your health bar. If your shield is depleted, that's when Magnetic Care starts to kick in, and how this will work is it will start giving you 8% of your max shield and 8% of your max magnetic force, and it will do this every single second all the way up for about 10 seconds. You can increase that even further if you do want to. So as you can see, I haven't really invested into it just yet, but you can go for like 10.4 seconds. So there are ways that you can increase that. But how this one works is that this is a separate resource. This is going to be fueling most of your later abilities. So your first 2 are going to be about storing it all up, so you do have this resource readily available, and then 3 and 4 are going to be the ways that you can expend this. So magnetic force as a maximum is 200% of your max shield. It's important that you go into shield as Kyle, because this will increase the amount of resource that you do have access to. On a cost interval of 1 second, you will eventually lose 1% of your max magnetic force. So if you don't actually use this, if you're not refreshing it with your skills, you will eventually lose 1% every single second until eventually you have none left. That's essentially the nitty-gritty behind it all. It will make more sense once we get into the skills, so why don't we just go into the first skill we have access to, and this is going to be Repulsion Dash. How this one works is that you will charge forward to inflict damage and knockback on the colliding enemy. You recover magnetic force proportional to your max energy shield upon dealing damage to an enemy, but the real kind of benefit that we're going to get from this is that when the skill ends, you give yourself defense plus for a certain period of time. This is a very substantial amount of defense plus as well, meaning that we're going to start being able to tank everything that's coming our way. In terms of like the details behind this, we do have ways, it does have a stacking procedure on this, so at max stacks you will have 3. On the cooldown this is 12 seconds, and as far as I can tell there's no way to reduce this down, which is a bit of a shame considering you can get the cooldowns back on some of your other skills, so why can't we reduce the cooldown on this? Not entirely sure, but every 12 seconds you will get a stack of this, and that allows you to then cast your ability. In terms of the skill effect, you will move forward up to a maximum of 10 meters if you target an enemy. Damage is going to be your skill power modifier times 250%, so we do want to go into skill power to increase the amount of damage we're going to do with this. In terms of like damage range and magnetic force, these can potentially be adjusted, at least the damage range can be. Not too sure if the magnetic force recovery itself will be able to, but just know that every single time you cast this ability and you need to hit an enemy, you can't just get this effect from being able to just cast this willy-nilly. You will get 30% of your max shield back into your magnetic force. Now remember that is of your shield, not of your magnetic force itself, so that is 30%. So it kind of works out to be around about 15% of your actual resource. So you do need to cast this a few times to be able to get all the way up to 100% of your magnetic force, so just keep that in mind. The defense up is 150% defense increase, which is huge. This is standard, will last for 5 seconds, so you can just use this to be able to keep refreshing it. You don't have to hit an enemy to get the defense up, which is really, really nice. So you can do, if you're just kind of like working your way around like one of the void intercepts and you're taking on one of the tyrants, you can just use this ability and you will gain that defense up. You don't have to worry about it. This can also be used mid-air, and you can use this as almost like a mid-range dash. It's actually quite effective in that capacity because you are able to travel a lot of distance really quickly. So you can use this as a little bit of utility, you can use it as movement, you can use this as a defense, and you also can use it in an offense manner. Repulsion dash originally just kind of didn't sit right with me as a first ability. It just kind of felt lackluster, but the more you dive into it, the more you get used to it, it actually does become a really, really good skill. So that's repulsions. Let's have a look at the second ability. This is going to be Magnetic Bulwark. I rarely use this, but you will use this a little bit more when it comes to like defense, kind of like wave defense, because you will be protecting the objective, you'll be protecting it from bullets, and when you do this, you will actually get some of your magnetic force back, which is really nice. But what this does is it creates a barrier right in front of you. It stops you from being able to attack, so you do have to hold and cast this yourself, but you create a barrier. When the barrier is hit, you recover magnetic force proportional to the enemy's damage received, which is really nice. In terms of the stats on this one, we do have a cooldown standard of 2 seconds. You can reduce this down. This will cost you a bit of shield, so it will cost you 5% of your max shield, and this will happen for every 1 second. So you just got to keep that in mind, that you are sacrificing a little bit of your shield just to keep this up so you take no damage, but you are gaining magnetic force. So it actually does work out to be better, especially defensively. So that's definitely something to consider if you do have low shield. Barrier's HP is 50% of your max shield, so like you definitely want to go into max shield once again. And your defense is 100% of your actual defense, so you can use this after a repulsion dash to be able to increase the amount of defense you'll have. This will last for a maximum of 8 seconds. You do have 100% of the enemy damage going straight back into your magnetic force. So between these two, you've got really fast ways of being able to get into your magnetic force, into your passive. Now, how we're going to be able to expend those is how we're going to do with the next ability, and the first one we've got is Magnetism Spurt. After you using Magnetism Spurt, Magnetism Force is consumed first before your energy shield or your HP when you're hit by an enemy. So this is another way to add an extra kind of like health bar onto you, which is really, really nice. When Magnetic Force is completely depleted, you deal damage to enemies within range. This damage is increased by the total damage received from the enemy while this is active. Pressing the skill button one more time will end the skill, and when the skill ends, you recover the energy shield of nearby allies proportional to the self's max energy shield. So you've got a way of being able to support your teammates as well, so you will actually give them back their shield as well, which is really nice, as long as they're within range. In terms of like the stats on this one, as standard, you do have a 15-second cooldown on this one. You can reduce this substantially, which is really nice, but just remember that this one kind of benefits from having more of your magnetic force. So you, in terms of cooldown on this, it's not going to factor in too much, but you do need to be able to start stacking it up, your magnetic force, to get the most out of this ability. As an interval cost, on 1 second you lose 2% of your magnetic force. Obviously, if you take damage, it will reduce it down even more. In terms of the effect though, your damage on this is going to be your skill power modifier times 617%, which is huge. In terms of additional damage, any damage that you receive, you will be timesing that by 5 essentially, and then outputting all of that, which is kind of crazy. So it kind of makes sense to get in the middle of everyone, to get in the middle of a pack, start taking that aggro, start taking that damage, and you'll do so much more damage out and about once this skill does end. In terms of like damage range, as standard, this is 5-meter radius, and your ally shield's recovery will be 100% of your max shield, so once again, makes sense to have as much shield as possible. And in terms of damage, it gets reduced by about 25%, so you do you are able to take a little bit more damage in that kind of sense. So overall, Magnetism Spurt is an amazing ability, and you will be using this mostly to be able to use for your magnetic force. But you do have another option, and this one is basically the WMD of your abilities. This is probably the single highest kind of damage ability that exists in the game, but you do need to be able to start working and like work your magnetic force all the way up to full to really get the most out of this ability. This is going to be called Superconductivity Thrusters. How this this one works is that it enables you to fly in the air for a certain period of time. You essentially turn yourself, if you've ever played Call of Duty, you turn yourself into a Predator missile in a sense, but what you'll do is you'll fly straight into the enemy, and then once you collide, you'll then do an explosion around your radius. You'll do a landing ability, but essentially you'll do that explosion, and then everyone within this radius is then going to get hit with a huge amount of damage. When you do cast this ability though, Magnetic Force is fully consumed when the skill ends because you use this to determine how much damage you're going to be doing. As standard, we have this at a 60-second cooldown. You can reduce this further. Minimum use condition, you do need at least 30% of your max Magnetic Force to be able to activate this ability, but you gain even more depending on what kind of threshold you meet once you do activate this. So as standard, the damage on this is your skill power modifier times 5,070%, which is just kind of insane. It's daft as to how much that's actually doing. That's essentially you're doing 50 times your current skill power modifier to be able to activate this ability, and it's just crazy as to how much this starts ramping up. If you do activate this ability at 50% of your magnetic force or higher, you also get an additional 50% on top of that, but if you get this to 75% or higher, this is where the big chunk kind of comes in, because we add an extra 1,000%, so we're adding another 10 times our skill power modifier to our damage, which is just absolutely bonkers. So we're going all the way up to over 61 times what our current skill power modifier is into this ability. It's just insane as to how much this will do. As in terms of a damage range, we do have this at 7 meters, and then in terms of duration, you can increase this as you can currently see, but you will be able to fly around for 6 seconds before you will then be forced to land and then use this ability. So we've had a look through the kit, we've seen what's so important, we've seen what are kind of like the main stats that we need to worry about, and these are going to be things like shield. We definitely want as much max shield as possible because this is going to give us more magnetic force. We can then consume this for even more damage and everything like that. We can take in even more damage as well with our number 3 ability, so we've got so many options available to us with the more shield that we do have access to ourselves. We also want to go into skill power because skill power is going to determine how hard we actually hit with our abilities, and as you can see, the multipliers on that are just crazy. So if we can get high enough skill power, the more damage we're going to be dealing. And lastly, we also want to go into defense because defense is going to be increased even further when we use our number 1 ability with our tackle charge, and that's going to then scale even higher off that. So we're going to have some insane kind of like numbers when it comes to defense. We're going to have some really nice shields, which means we're going to take in so much damage. We're going to have so many resources, and then we've got our skill power to increase how much damage we're doing with our abilities. Kyle is pretty crazy when it comes to the amount of damage that his abilities can do, but you do need to manage that resource meter when it comes to the magnetic force. So what else do we need to have a look at? Well, in terms of weaponry, you can pretty much get away with anything that you want to. Legendaries are pretty good and everything like that. I do rock the Thunder Cage just to increase the amount of DPS that can do. But let's have a quick look into the Descendant modules because you can feel free to start customizing those weapons to yourself. Feel free to use whatever you're comfortable with. So if we go into the Descendant modules, now this is not min-max by any means or any like thing. This is just something that's worked for me so far. I've just come from a Devourer kill, so I know that this does actually work. So the main thing you want to do is you can go for any kind of sub like mod that can go here. Feel free to go for anything, it doesn't matter which one, as long as you increase the enchantment level so many marks, that will give you more module capacity. So you definitely want to get something that you enjoy. But the main ones that really kind of help us out are going to be things like max shield, skill cooldown is going to help out, defense is going to be a huge one, and we also want to see if we can try and increase our HP and the amount of damage that we can deal. The reason why is because obviously shield is just standard, that's going to be our resource, that's going to be all that extra damage. Skill cooldown, so we can start using things a little bit faster. Skill power is going to affect how often we're going, or how hard we're going to be hitting with those abilities, and our defense and our HP are going to keep us alive in that fight longer, and that means that we can take on those like Devourers or any of those bosses. We can stand right next to their feet and we can start taking the punishment where the other teammates do what they need to be able to start doing DPS. So which ones are going to be vital in that sense? Well, increased shield as a blue mod is huge. That's going to be giving us the most out of our max shield, so we definitely want to increase that as high as possible. Technician is going to be a great way of being able to increase our skill power. Increased defense is going to be another one for increasing our defense, obviously. Nimble fingers is going to be our skill cooldown, and we do have our willpower, which is also going to increase the amount of defense, and it's not sacrificing any shield for us to be able to get that. You can also go for increased HP, and then all the extra things here are just like kind of increasing it a little bit more along those kind of lines. So extra HP, extra defense, and then we also have skill, but we don't use MP, so we can use things like that to reduce it down because it's not going to cost us anything in the long run. So that pretty much wraps up in terms of like what I currently rock with Kyle and what I would be looking to do the exact same thing once the game launches, and then obviously start to look to min-max it and everything like that. I have had an absolute blast being able to play with Kyle, and while I thought originally that his gear wasn't going to be anything special, I was pleasantly surprised with this, and I had an absolute blast being able to use him. So I hope you learned something useful from this guide. I hope you've learned something useful with ourselves. Make sure to go pick up Kyle while you can and be able to have a little bit of fun with him, but we'll definitely be looking to do some more guides on him once the full game does actually drop. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does help the channel out. Let us know in the comments section down below, what do you think of Kyle, and what is your favourite Descendant that has been in both of these betas. I'd love to be able to have a little bit of conversation with you down in the comment section. But with all that said and done, that just leaves me to say, keep yourselves safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.